The first drop of rain hit the windshield like a fat, angry insect. Then another. Then a dozen, 100. Until the world dissolved into a roaring gray-white static. Leo White knuckled the steering wheel, leaning forward as if the extra 2 inches would somehow improve his visibility. The wipers beat a frantic, useless rhythm, smearing the deluge rather than clearing it. "Just great," he muttered to the empty rental car. The voice that came back was tinny and false. The voice of a man trying to convince himself he was still in control. A real picture postcard afternoon. The picture, however, was all wrong. This wasn't the gentle rolling countryside promised by the tourism brochures. This was a deep, primordial pocket of West Virginia where the mountains seemed to clench like a fist, and the trees, ancient, thick-limbed oaks and dense stands of pine, crowded the narrow asphalt, ribbon as if trying to reclaim it. His phone, suction-cupped to the dashboard, had cheerfully rerouted him an hour ago. "Faster route available," it had chirped, its blue line snaking enticingly away from the clogged interstate. A shortcut. Now the blue line was frozen. A digital relic of a time when he had a signal, when he had a destination, when he was a man named Leo with a life waiting for him in Columbus. He was a graphic designer, not an adventurer. His battles were fought with Pantone swatches and client feedback, not the elements. This trip was supposed to be a simple, mind-clearing drive after a project that had stretched his nerves to their breaking point. Now his nerves were beginning to fray all over again. The car, a compact sedan with the soul of an appliance, gave a sudden wet shudder. A sound like a death rattle echoed from deep within its chassis. A guttural final protest. The dashboard lights flickered. A Christmas tree of impending doom. And then everything went dark. The engine died with a sigh, the wipers freezing mid-swipe, leaving a curtain of water obscuring half his view. Silence, or rather the absence of engine noise, replaced by the deafening roar of the storm on the metal roof. Leo sat there for a full minute, listening to the frantic thumping of his own heart. He tried the ignition. The starter motor whined pathetically, a dying man's last breath. Nothing. No, 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 no. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, the horn letting out a brief, choked bleat that was swallowed by the rain. He fumbled for his phone. No service. The 2 words glowed with a malevolent finality. He was well and truly stranded. He had 2 choices, both of them terrible. Sit here in this metal coffin and hope for a miracle, a passing sheriff, a tow truck sent by divine intervention, or venture out into the drowning world. He peered through the water-streaked window. The light was failing fast, the afternoon bleeding into a premature storm-choked twilight. The woods were a wall of shifting dark green, the road a drowned river of blacktop. Then he saw it. A flicker. A faint yellowish glow, maybe a half-mile up the road, just visible through the skeletal branches of the trees. A light, a house. Hope, treacherous and thin, sparked in his chest. It was a decision made for him. He couldn't stay here. Grabbing his backpack from the passenger seat, containing his laptop, a half-eaten bag of pretzels, and a mostly empty bottle of water, he took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The cold was a physical assault. It instantly soaked through his thin jacket and jeans, the wind driving the rain into his face with stinging force. Within seconds, he was drenched to the skin, his sneakers squelching in the mud at the road's edge. He began to walk, head down, shoulders hunched, each step a battle against the sucking mud and the wind that seemed to want to push him back. The world had shrunk to the few feet in front of him. The roar of the rain was a white noise that filled his skull, a constant pounding reminder of his own vulnerability. He focused on the light, that single, unwavering point in the gloom. As he trudged closer, it resolved into a single, bare bulb hanging from a rusted chain on a wide covered porch. The house it illuminated was a 2-story farmhouse, a monument to entropy. Its once white paint was blistered and peeled, showing the gray, rotten wood beneath like old bones. The porch sagged in the middle like a tired spine, and the screens on the windows were torn and rusted, like cobwebs over dead eyes. But the light was on, a beacon, a promise of shelter. He climbed the creaking wooden steps, his heart thudding a frantic, hopeful rhythm. The porch offered a small reprieve from the direct onslaught of the rain, but the wind still whipped sheets of water underneath the roof. There was a stillness here, a pocket of silence that felt heavier, more profound than the roaring chaos outside. It was the quiet of a place that had been left alone for a very long time. He knocked on the heavy wooden door. The sound unnaturally loud, a violation of the silence. For a long moment, there was nothing. He was about to knock again when he heard it, the slow, deliberate scrape of a heavy bolt being drawn back. The door opened just a crack. The width of a man's face and a single, pale blue eye peered out from the darkness within. It was a startlingly clear eye set in a web of wrinkles, and it regarded him with neither welcome nor alarm, but a kind of ancient, weary assessment.
Yeah?
A voice asked. It was dry and raspy, the sound of autumn leaves skittering across bare ground. "My car," Leo began, his voice too loud, too eager. It broke down. "Back down the road. I don't have any cell signal. Could I possibly use your phone?" The eye blinked slowly. The door didn't move. "Ain't got a phone," the voice said, the statement flat and absolute. "Lines went down in a storm back in '78. Never saw the need to get 'em back." Leo's hope, that fragile spark, guttered. "Oh, right." He wiped a stream of water from his face. "Well, I don't suppose you have a car. Or is there a neighbor?" "No car. No neighbors for 5 miles. The eye looked past him into the sheeting rain. "Bad night to be out." "I know," Leo said, a desperate laugh escaping him. "Believe me, I know. Could I just wait out the worst of it on your porch?" The old man considered this. The door creaked open a little wider, revealing a sliver of a face, papery skin stretched over sharp cheekbones. A thin, unsmiling mouth, a jaw dusted with white stubble. He was thin and stooped, clad in faded overalls over a flannel shirt. "Suppose," the man said finally, "but you'll catch your death out here. Come on in, don't track mud." Gratitude flooded Leo, warm and immediate, washing away the last of his unease. Thank you so much." He stepped carefully over the threshold, wiping his feet on a worn, fraying mat. The air inside was thick and still, heavy with the scent of dust. Old wood and something else. Something faintly sweet and medicinal, like camphor or dried flowers. It was the smell of a closed-up space, of time held captive. The hallway was dark, the only light spilling in from the open door and from a parlor to the left. His eyes adjusted slowly. Faded floral wallpaper, once perhaps a cheerful pattern of roses, now peeled at the seams, showing the plaster beneath. A grandfather clock stood sentinel in a corner, its pendulum still, its hands frozen at 3:17. Dark. Heavy furniture, a hall tree, a sideboard loomed in the shadows, their shapes bulky and indistinct. "Name's Elias," the old man said, shuffling ahead of him into the parlor. His movements were stiff, careful, as if his joints were held together with rust and memory. "You can sit there," he pointed, a bony finger towards a high-backed armchair, upholstered in a scratchy burgundy fabric. Leo White, thank you, sir. I really appreciate this." Elias just grunted, lowering himself with a soft groan into a worn wingback chair opposite. A single oil lamp on a small, marble-topped table between them provided the only light, its soft golden glow pushing back the shadows in a small, intimate circle. Beyond that circle, the room was a cave of darkness. The rain hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm on the roof, a sound that was both outside and somehow inside the very bones of the house. "You from around here?" Elias asked, his gaze fixed on Leo with an unsettling intensity. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale and washed out, but they held a sharp, unnerving focus. "No, just passing through." "Heading to Ohio for work." "Ohio," Elias repeated, as if it were a mythical land from a storybook. "Bad night to be traveling. Bad night to be out at all." An awkward silence fell, filled only by the symphony of the storm. Leo's eyes, desperate for an anchor, wandered the room. It was a museum of a life suspended in amber. Doilies, yellowed with age, adorned the arms of the chairs. A dusty harmonica sat on the mantelpiece. And on that same mantelpiece, above a cold, ash-filled fireplace, was a collection of photographs in tarnished silver frames. They were all of the same young woman. She had dark hair pulled back from a pale, heart-shaped face and serious, dark eyes that seemed to look at something just beyond the camera. In one, she was holding a simple bouquet of wildflowers, a shy, hesitant smile touching her lips. In another, she stood by a massive, sprawling oak tree, her hand resting gently on the trunk as if communing with it. She was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way, her beauty belonging to another era. "Your daughter?" Leo asked, nodding towards the pictures, desperate to fill the heavy quiet. Elias's face, which had been a mask of grim neutrality, seemed to soften for a fraction of a second. The lines around his eyes deepened, but not with a smile, with a memory. "Cora," he said, his voice dropping, becoming almost gentle. "My wife. She's beautiful," Leo said, and he meant it. There was a stillness to her, a grace that transcended the faded sepia tones. "Was," Elias corrected, the softness vanishing as quickly as it had come. "Consumption. Took her the winter of '55. A cold knot tightened in Leo's stomach. 1955. This man had been living with a ghost for nearly 70 years. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "The house has been quiet since," Elias said, his eyes drifting from Leo to the shadows beyond the lamplight. Too quiet. As if on cue, a sound echoed from upstairs. A soft, rhythmic thump. Thump! Thump! It was unmistakable. The sound of something heavy and soft, maybe a book being dropped on the floor, or a ball, a gentle, patient bouncing. Leo's head snapped up. His eyes darted to the ceiling, then back to Elias. "I thought you lived alone." Elias didn't look at him. His gaze was distant, lost in the labyrinth of his own memories. "I do." Thump! 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 It was coming from directly above them, a steady metronomic pulse. Leo felt a cold trickle of unease run down his spine, separate from the chill of his wet clothes. "You sure you don't have a cat or something? A raccoon in the attic? Maybe a branch hitting the roof?" "No cats, no raccoons. No branches on that side of the house," Elias said, his voice still that same low rasp. He finally turned his pale eyes back to Leo. "It's just the house. It remembers." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so devoid of wonder or fear, sent a fresh wave of goosebumps across Leo's arms. "It remembers." "Remembers what?" Leo asked, his own voice barely a whisper. Elias leaned forward slightly, the lamplight carving deep hollows in his cheeks, making him look like a skull draped in parchment. Cora was lonely. She was a city girl from Charleston. She loved this house, loved the land, but she missed the bustle, the company. After she took sick, she'd lie in her room upstairs, the one right above us, and she'd talk for hours. To me, to the walls. She said a house shouldn't be an empty thing. It should hold on to the lives that were lived in it, that it should be a living memory. He paused, tilting his head as the thumping upstairs ceased as suddenly as it had begun. The silence that followed felt louder than the sound itself. "I think, in a way, she got her wish." Leo didn't know what to say. The rational part of his brain, the designer who lived in a world of logic and pixels, screamed at him. Grief, senility, the fancies of a lonely old man, the wind in the eaves, the settling of an old structure. It was all perfectly explainable. It had to be. But the part of him that was cold, wet, and stranded in the heart of a roaring storm wasn't so sure. "I think the rain's letting up a little," Leo said, standing abruptly. The chair legs scraped against the wooden floor with a shriek that made him flinch. "I should probably try and walk for help. Maybe I'll get a signal a mile or two down the road." Elias looked up at him, and for a terrifying second, Leo saw something in those pale blue eyes that wasn't grief or senility. It was a sharp, knowing glint, a flicker of something ancient and predatory. "It's not letting up," he said softly. "Listen." Leo listened. The rain was, if anything, falling harder now, a solid, pounding wall of water punishing the old shingles. There was no diminishment, only a constant, roaring fury. "Sit down, son," Elias said. Not unkindly, but with a tone that brooked no argument. "The night's young, and Cora, she so enjoys having a guest." The way he said guest made the skin on the back of Leo's neck prickle. It wasn't a welcome. It was a designation, a title. He sat back down, not because he wanted to, but because his legs felt suddenly weak, his will seeping away into the dusty floorboards. The silence that descended this time was different. It was a waiting silence, a hungry one. Another hour passed. The oil lamp began to flicker, its flame guttering as if starved for air. The shadows in the room stretched and contorted, becoming solid, menacing shapes. A coat on the hall tree became a hunched specter. The pattern on the wallpaper seemed to writhe and shift in the corner of his vision. Leo tried to make conversation, asking about the farm, the history of the area, but Elias would only give monosyllabic answers. His attention seemingly focused on something else, something in the air that Leo couldn't perceive. Then a new sound. From the hallway, clear and delicate, came the notes of a music box. A tinkling, old-fashioned melody that Leo recognized vaguely as Greensleeves. It was perfectly played, each note crystalline and pure, cutting through the roar of the storm. Elias smiled, a thin, brittle cracking of his lips that showed yellowed teeth. It was the first real expression Leo had seen on his face, and it was more frightening than his previous grimness. She always loved that tune. I gave her that music box for our first anniversary. Leo stared at him, his blood running cold. There's no one in the hallway. Isn't there? Elias replied, his gaze drifting towards the parlor door. The music box played on, the sound seeming to circle the parlor door, never coming closer, never moving away. It was as if someone was carrying it, pacing slowly in the hall. Leo squeezed his eyes shut, telling himself it was the wind. A trick of the acoustics in the old house, a loose wire vibrating in just the right way. But when he opened them, the music was still there, clear and perfect and impossible. He had to get out, now! Rational explanations be damned. The atmosphere in the house had shifted from melancholic to actively malevolent. He stood again, this time more decisively. I really have to go. Thank you for your hospitality. I'll send a tow truck back for my car as soon as I can. Elias didn't try to stop him. He just watched as Leo walked quickly to the front door, his pale eyes unblinking. You can't leave, Leo, he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. She won't let you. She's been so lonely. Leo's hand closed on the cold brass doorknob. He turned it. It refused to budge. He jiggled it, pulled with all his strength, then put his shoulder against the solid painted wood. It was like trying to move a mountain. The door was locked, or held fast by something more than a bolt. It's no use, Elias said from behind him. He hadn't moved from his chair. The house does what she wants now. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through Leo's disbelief. It flooded his system, turning his limbs to water and his mind to a frantic, scrambling thing. He turned from the door, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The music box had stopped. The only sound was the relentless rain and the frantic, runaway train beat of his own heart. And then he saw it. In the dark hallway, just at the edge of the lamplight's reach, a figure. It was faint, like a heat shimmer over asphalt on a hot day, but it was there. The shape of a woman in a long, old-fashioned dress. She was translucent, her form composed of the very darkness of the house itself, the dust motes and the shadows coalescing into a semblance of a person. He couldn't see her face, but he knew, with a certainty that froze the very marrow in his bones, that it was Cora. She was turned towards him, a presence of profound stillness and immense weight. Thump, thump, thump. The sound started again from upstairs, louder this time, more insistent. It was a demand now, not a memory. It was directly over his head. The faint figure in the hallway began to glide towards him. She made no sound on the creaky floorboards. She moved through the air, through the very substance of the house, her form drifting like smoke. Leo backed away, stumbling into the parlor, his eyes wide with terror. Elias was still sitting in his chair, watching the apparition with a look of tender sadness. She just wants to talk, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. She just doesn't want to be alone anymore. The temperature in the room plummeted. Leo's breath plumed in the air before him, a white ghost in the lamplight. The figure of Cora passed through the parlor doorway. She didn't walk around it. She simply flowed through the wood and plaster as if it were water. Now he could see her face more clearly. It was the face from the photographs, but gaunt, hollowed out by illness and time. Her eyes not just dark, but hollow pits of profound, eternal loneliness. She reached a hand towards him, a hand that was barely more than shifting shadow, the fingers long and pale. "Stay," a voice whispered. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air, but one that bloomed directly inside his mind, dry and raspy and desperate, the sound of dead leaves and forgotten things. "Stay with us," Leo screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of pure terror. He turned and ran, not for the front door, but for the back of the house. For the kitchen he'd glimpsed earlier. Maybe there was a back door, a window he could break. He burst into the dark kitchen, his hands flailing against the walls, searching for a switch, a knob, anything. His fingers found an old-fashioned push-button switch. He slammed his palm against it. Nothing. The power was dead. Had probably been dead for decades. The only light was the faint glow from the parlor. Behind him, the house itself seemed to groan in protest. The walls contracted, the ceiling lowering perceptibly. The floorboards beneath his feet rippled like the surface of a pond, a wave of motion that traveled from the hallway towards him. A cupboard door to his left swung open on its own, then slammed shut with a crack like a gunshot. He was in a nightmare, a waking, breathing nightmare. He found a door, half hidden by a tall pantry. He yanked it open, revealing a set of steep, rickety wooden stairs leading down into absolute blackness. The cellar. It was a hole, a pit, but it was away from her. He scrambled down, the wooden steps groaning and bending under his weight. The smell of damp earth, rot, and cold stone rising to meet him. He stood at the bottom, panting in the pitch dark, the sound of his own terror echoing in the confined space. He could hear things moving upstairs. Not just footsteps, but the sound of furniture being dragged, of doors opening and closing in a frantic, chaotic rhythm. The house was awake, and it was angry. A sliver of light appeared at the top of the stairs. The cellar door was opening. He saw a silhouette against the light. Not Elias. It was Cora, her dark form blocking the exit, her hollow gaze fixed on the darkness where he stood. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was right behind him now in the cellar itself. He spun around, his eyes straining in the impenetrable blackness. And then a match was struck. The sudden sulphurous flare was blinding. Elias was standing in the far corner of the cellar, holding the small, flickering flame. His face was calm, serene even, in the dancing light. The light illuminated the space around him, and Leo saw what was making the sound. In the corner, suspended by a thick, dusty rope from a low, blackened beam, was a child's swing, a simple, weathered wooden seat, and sitting on it, gently swaying back and forth, her feet scuffing against the packed earth floor with each pass, was Cora, not the ghost, the body. It was desiccated, mummified by the dry, cool cellar air. She was still wearing a faded blue dress, the fabric clinging to a skeletal frame. Her dark hair was lank and brittle around a skull-like face, the skin stretched tight and leathery over the bones. One hand rested in her lap, the other hung limply at her side. Her glassy, sunken eyes, shriveled in their sockets, seemed to be fixed directly on Leo, and with each slow, pendulum-like arc of the swing, the heels of her small, lace-up boots dragged on the ground. Thump, thump, thump. Leo's mind shattered. The world, with all its rules and logic, dissolved into a screaming, impossible horror. The scream that tore from his throat was silent, stolen by a terror so complete it paralyzed his very soul. Elias looked from the corpse on the swing to Leo, his expression one of serene, mad devotion. "I couldn't bear to put her in the cold ground," he explained softly, as if discussing the weather. "She was so lonely in that room upstairs, so cold. So I brought her down here. It's dry. It's safe. I found a way, a old way in a book she had, to keep her with me, to let the house keep her, to tie her spirit to the wood and the stone." He took a step forward, the match flame wavering. "She's in the walls, in the floors, in the very dust. She is the house now. And a house needs to be lived in. It needs company. She needs a new friend, a permanent friend." The ghostly form of Cora was now gliding down the cellar steps, her hollow eyes fixed on him, the mental whisper filling his head, no longer desperate, but possessive, triumphant. "Stay." The temperature in the cellar dropped until the moisture in Leo's breath froze on his lips. The walls began to press in, the earth itself seeming to shift and writhe, roots pushing through the stone like grasping fingers. He was trapped. There was no way out. The thumping of the corpse's feet on the cellar floor was the only clock he had left, ticking down the last seconds of his life, of his sanity. The spectral Cora reached him. The shadow hand touched his chest. It was not cold, but a profound absence of heat, a void that sucked the life and warmth from his body. He felt a paralyzing numbness spread through him, starting from his heart, locking his joints, turning his blood to ice. He couldn't move. He couldn't even blink. The last thing he saw was Elias blowing out the match, plunging the cellar into a blackness so complete it felt solid, a physical substance filling his mouth and lungs. The last thing he heard was the gentle, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the swing and the faint, dry rustle of a papery dress as the corpse slowly, deliberately, turned its head towards him in the consuming dark. Outside, as dawn finally began to bleach the eastern sky, the rain eased to a drizzle, then stopped altogether. The storm moved on, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. The old farmhouse stood silent and dark, water dripping from its sagging gutters. To anyone passing by, it would look just as it always had, empty, forgotten, and perfectly, terribly still. But if they were to stop and listen very, very closely, with an ear pressed to the cool, damp earth, they might hear it, faint but persistent. A sound not of grief, but of a terrible shared contentment. The soft, rhythmic thumping from deep within the ground. And if they listened even closer, they might hear something else, a new voice, faint and trapped, yet slowly becoming part of the chorus, joining the old one in a whispered, eternal conversation. A story of loneliness that had, at last, found a way to never, ever end.